Well, as Rex mentioned, I have been part of honors for a long time. Actually became part of the administration here in 2001. But prior to that even, I've been teaching honors seminars. I had advised a number of honors and major students. So the Burnett Honors College has always been very close to me, and that's why I continue to teach in honors. And every February, when Valentine's Day rolls around, I've been invited to give a workshop on romantic, passionate love, and I'm happy to be here and do so. So before I get started with our discussion, I'm going to make sure everyone received this sheet, which is titled Passionate Love Scale. Again, you just fill this out on your own. Don't need to show this to anyone. I am not collecting it, but later on I'll show you how to self-score. Okay, then we'll work this into our workshop about passionate love. So I wanted to start off with a few historical factoids and some context for love. We really don't know who the actual Saint Valentine is, because when we go to the Catholic martyrologies, if you can believe this, there are actually 3 Saint Valentines associated with February 14th. So historians haven't quite figured out which one might be related to the Saint Valentine that we associate with our holiday. King Henry VIII officially declared February 14th to be Valentine's Day, and this is the guy, remember, who had 6 wives. Most of them fared very poorly. Right? Let's see some other items here. It's around the 1800s that doctors started to prescribe chocolate for patients to cure them of a broken heart. So very early on, we see this association with chocolate, candy, and Valentine's. Casanova, the great lover, ate chocolate because he believed that this made him virile, better able to perform. Cadbury, you've heard of the Cadbury bar, right? And they also make these Easter bunnies, right? Well, back in the 1800s, Richard Cadbury, who founded that company, produced the first box of chocolates for Valentine's Day. And today, about 35 million heart-shaped boxes of chocolate will be sold on Valentine's Day. So it's become a really big commodity. So here are some other historical factoids to put love in the context. About $1 billion worth of chocolate is sold in Valentine's Day, just in the United States. About 100 million roses, red roses, will be sold around Valentine's Day as well. 3% of pet owners, right, will give Valentine's Day gifts to their pets. The oldest surviving love poem was written in a Sumerian clay tablet around over 5,000 years ago. Okay, so we have this enduring testament to the love between 2 people. And Valentine's Day is not celebrated universally. So you notice that we have only a small subset of countries, including the US, of course, which celebrate Valentine's Day. So, thinkers, writers, poets have been thinking, pondering, and writing about love throughout the century. So I wanted to leave you with some of the more well-known quotes about love. George Sand wrote, "There is only one happiness in life, to love and to be loved." Emerson wrote, "To love often and love much, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to give oneself, this is to have succeeded." Passion makes the world go round. Love just makes it a safer place. That's the only quote I've ever used in an academic presentation. That's by Ice-T. I should say a rapper quote. Tennyson, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all." Now, at this point, I think you're going to see the tone and the tenor of the quotes start to change. So with Robert Frost, love is an irresistible desire to be irresistibly desired. Mencken, who was a journalist out of Baltimore, wrote, "Love is the triumph of imagination over intelligence." So again, I think you're starting to detect a trend here. There's a reason for that. Another Mencken quote, "Love is the delusion that one woman differs from another." Wow. And Philip Berry, basically he's a humorist. He wrote Love, two minds without a single thought. The Greek playwright Euripides thought that when love is in excess, it brings a man no honor nor worthiness. And Plato himself wrote, love is a serious mental disease. And we're going to come back to this notion now. That, in other words, at the very first quotes that we had seen basically treated love as a very positive, desirable experience. One that would be uplifting to the human condition. But as you see, this hasn't always been the case. There also seems to be this undertow with regard to maybe there's such a thing as excessive love or maybe too much love. Is that possible? Love and Marriage by Goethe. Love is an ideal thing, marriage a real thing. A confusion of the real with the ideal never goes unpunished. And for Bierce, love, a temporary insanity curable by marriage. And Zsa Zsa Gabor stated, a man in love is incomplete until he's married. Then he's finished. She, by the way, had 8 husbands in real life. And Einstein thought, how on earth are you ever going to explain in terms of chemistry and physics so important a biological phenomenon as first love? And Lily Tomlin, comedian, wrote, if love is the question, if love is the answer, could you please rephrase the question? And we're going to try to answer some of these questions throughout the workshop today. Cole Porter, of course, wrote many wonderful love songs, and actually one of his songs is called What Is This Thing Called Love? Love continues to dominate a lot of social media, so I have a few magazine covers here. This is the Atlantic magazine. The title is The Science of Love. National Geographic, Love, the Chemical Reaction. Another National Geographic, that's actually the playing off of a Roy Lichtenstein painting. He's a pop artist. And again, notice the chemistry, biology here. And I thought this is an interesting article as well from the Orlando Sentinel several years ago. And they found these 2 skeletons, male and female, interred together. They were buried together in the same grave, and their bodily positions were posed in such a way that they have been in this eternal embrace, presumably one of love. And this is, let's see, these are 5,000-year-old skeletons. And curiously, they were found right near the city of Verona, where Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. That was the setting for Romeo and Juliet in the play. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more of the history about love, and then we'll start to talk about the psychology and how this relates to you. But the reason why I bring up the historical perspective is because our concept of love, our definition or thoughts of love today in our culture has been changing throughout history. And in fact, our conceptualizations of love today really only came about maybe 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago. So it's a relatively recent development with regard to how we think about love and what happens when we say we are in love. Okay? So if we begin with the ancient Greeks, they made a distinction between 2 types of love. The rational, otherwise known as Platonic love, versus the carnal. So carnal would be what we consider lust. It's very sexual, it's very animalistic, it's impulsive. It has everything to do with bodily desire and yearnings. In contrast, if we're talking about rational or Platonic love, this is no longer carnal or sexual. It has to deal more with an understanding of another person's nature at a deep level, not just superficially, not just in terms of physical lust, but for the ancient Greeks, if you were to enter into a Platonic love relationship, it would ordinarily be non-sexual. There would be the physical intimacy, but there would be a great deal of self-disclosure. There'd be a great deal of psychological intimacy to the extent that these individuals would be sharing a lot about themselves. And many times this would delve into the area of philosophical discourse, right? So the Greeks actually thought that Platonic love was the more preferred or the ideal love relationship, because having a platonic relationship allows you to elevate yourself and the other person in a way that carnal love cannot. Because if you're just solely dealing with satisfying sexual appetites, you're not acting any differently than the other beasts in the animal kingdom. And so I wanted to clarify two other terms here, ethos and pathos. So ethos would refer to rational, logical thought, that which separates humans from other organisms. Pathos would refer to, this is the same word as pathology, right? Like sickness. Someone has a pathology, right? They're ill. This refers to an individual who is highly emotional to the point where the Greeks considered that individual to be sick. And we saw a quote by Plato earlier, right? Where he's considering love to be a serious mental disease. Too much love is not a good thing, at least according to the Greek conceptualization of love and relationships. Stop me if you have questions, okay? When we get to the Roman era, I guess the best way I can describe this is, if any of you have ever seen the movie Gladiator, yeah, right? Some of you have. Okay, well, essentially, the love relationships, you know, whether it's within the family, whether it's with a partner, has a lot to do with control and using leverage in order to manage someone else or to get something from someone else. So love now becomes part of a game in which people are manipulating each other for power. Okay, so quite a different view of love compared to the earlier Greeks. When we get into early Christianity, that's now where we start to see religion inject itself into notions of love and marriage and what it means to have an appropriate relationship between a man and a woman. Of course, this is a relationship that should be without sin. And if a couple were to be married in the eyes of the church, at least according to the Catholic Church, that marriage symbolizes the bond that man should have with God. So marriage was now considered to be a sacred symbol of God's love for man and vice versa. So, the medieval period, and now we're primarily talking about southern France where this begins. We have the development of troubadours for the first time. So anyone know what a troubadour is? What did troubadours do? What did they do? Go ahead.
Did they like recite poems and stories?
Yeah, okay, recite poems, they sang. Do you know what their poems and singing was all about? Go ahead.
It's about like love and relationship.
Yeah, yeah. So let's jump into a time capsule and consider what southern France looked like around 1250, 1300, okay? We're dealing with a lot of feuding nobility, right? The king of France has not solidified or unified the country. So we have lots of different fiefdoms, right? And each one is protected and controlled by a noble who is safely protected by a castle, which itself is probably behind a moat, okay? And that's why parts of Europe are just filled with castles, right? These are different nobility who are hanging on to their particular territory, okay? So these noble men also had noble women. They would get married, you know, and then of course there would be the maids of the court, handmaidens who looked after the queen or the duchess. So there would always be a coterie of well-educated, genteel women who were part of the court. Now, during this time, it was okay for men to jump on a horse and to ride out into the country. You know, let's go attack a peasant or declare war in the next castle or something like that. But women couldn't do that. Women could not leave the protective estate of a castle. So in effect, even despite the fact that they were nobility, they were prisoners. Women just simply could not leave without being escorted by a bunch of heavily armed men, right? That just didn't happen. So now we have these women. Again, they're typically educated, they know music, they know art, they know poetry, many of them can read, and of course they're sewing. But they're bored. I mean, you're in a castle all day, 24/7, 365 days a year, you're really bored, okay? And so there became a need for troubadours. So basically, these are traveling entertainers. They composed their own melodies, they sang, they recited poetry, they would do juggling acts, acrobats, musicians would be part of this entourage. So the troubadours basically would be a band of these artisans who traveled from castle to castle. The main idea was to entertain the lady folk in the castles. Okay? So, again, think about the psychological context. You know, you're getting paid as a troubadour to entertain, so you have to make sure that you're giving the audience something that they want. This is where love comes in. Okay, and we all know that romantic comedies are still really big today in the movies, rom-coms. Well, they discovered this back then. Okay, and so what they started to do, the troubadours, was compose songs and poetry, which essentially talked about unfulfilled love, unrecorded love, right? And essentially what they were doing now is they were speaking to the hearts of the noble women. The idea now being that they're trapped, they're prisoners, but they have an imagination. And in some sense, the troubadours were probably singing from their heart when they look at a fair maiden, and actually think, gosh, I wish I was, in a better position where she might be able to love me, right? So he's actually pouring his heart out, but it's unrecorded because he's a commoner. He's not going to ever marry a noble woman. But that's how this whole notion of romance and romantic love and the tragedy of unfulfilled love comes about. It comes about because of the troubadours in southern France, primarily the Provence region of France, and later this extends to Italy as well as parts of Germany and England. So I mention this again because we have this first notion of romantic love developing at this point in history. A little bit later on during the Renaissance period, we have the rise of the middle class, right, the merchant class and the guilds. And now they've also carried over this notion that there can be a romantic love between a man and a woman. It's not just symbolic of the spiritual love of God toward man, but it's becoming more secular, and we also see that developing down here during the industrial period that started about 200 years ago. And now with this secularization of marriage, we're starting to see that individual couples are treated distinctly now as a particular couple. It's the honeymoon that starts to develop around this period. The notion of that newlyweds need to go on a honeymoon, partly because with the industrial revolution, people are working, they're punching clocks now, right? And so management had to figure out some way of giving them release time. It had to be prescribed a limited amount of time for the individual to go away on a honeymoon. That's really where it becomes pretty standard. And of course now we have the hyper-consumerism and the commercialism associated with Valentine's Day and love. I mean, if a man wants to profess his love, he's got to buy diamonds or roses or chocolate. I mean, that's the message that's been promoted by all of these companies, right? Associated with love. Show her you love her with diamonds. That pretty much says it all as far as hyper-consumerism. Okay, so let me help you score this. Right, this is the sheet that you filled out, and basically, okay. So essentially, what you're doing is you're just adding up. There's no reverse scores here. Just add up the total, of course, all 15 items.
Do you have any extras?
Sure, I got a whole bunch here.
Anybody else need them?
Anyone else need it? That's a whole bunch. So again, you're not sharing this with anyone. I'm not collecting these sheets. So you should have one total score. That's what we're going to be looking at. This is an instrument that was devised by Hatfield and Sprecher. I've actually done research and published articles using this particular scale. It's called the Passionate Love Scale, sometimes the Romantic Love Scale, and what else do I have to say about it? Essentially, it's probably one of the more widely used psychometric devices in order to assess an individual's level of passion. Okay, so once you get a total across those 15 items, you're basically comparing that to the score ranges that you see here. Okay, so for instance, if we look at the very lowest level, extremely cool, we typically don't find people who score in that range. Okay, it's pretty much a lack of passion or romantic feelings. We're more likely to find you operating in the average or perhaps even the passionate range on the Passionate Love Scale. Okay, and then finally, this is kind of rare, and we have a lot more to talk about it in our workshop. We do find people who hit the very top level, extremely passionate, and so we want to, I think we're going to continue our discussion basically in trying to understand what happens when someone is operating at a really high, extremely high level of passionate love. Any questions on scoring or what this device does? If you have a partner or a friend, you can always try it out on a friend. I wouldn't press him or her for the answer though. This should be pretty discreet. Go ahead.
Should I answer as if it's current? Like, if you say I would feel despair if X left me, would it be as if it had just happened, for example?
Yeah. You're in the moment.
Okay.
In the moment. Okay. Okay. So the question is, can you love too much? The answer is, yeah, you can. To the ancient Greeks. Okay. So from popular media. This movie is probably before your time. It's called The Crush. He thought it was just a crush. He was dead wrong. Right? That's the tagline. Of course, Lolita, back in the 50s, a Stanley Kubrick film. And the protagonist here falls in love with a preteen named Lolita. Okay? He develops this obsessive, passionate love for a young girl. This is an interesting one. Back in probably the 60s, Play Misty for Me, there is a woman in the throes of extreme passion. She also happens to have a sharp object in her hands. And you might not know this, but that is Clint Eastwood. He's not the tough guy now, right? He is the victim of a woman who has become obsessed with him to the point where she is physically dangerous and threatening. Fatal Attraction, Michael Douglas, Glenn Close, another Hollywood version of what happens when someone is experiencing extreme passionate love. Single White Female, it's Bridget Fonda, has to deal with two roommates, and they were both women, in which one roommate now starts to have this passionate, obsessive attachment toward the other, to the point where it becomes unhealthy and dangerous. Anyone ever see this? This is a Stephen King, right? So if you've seen it, you'll know it's pretty creepy. I'm not going to, spoil it for those of you who haven't seen it, but I'd recommend seeing it. It's one of the better Stephen King adaptations, but it has all to do with someone. In this case, it's a fan of an author who ends up trapping the author because she loves him so much. I mean, physically making him a prisoner because of her professed love for him. Okay, everyone know this song by The Police, right? But have you ever paid attention to the words? I mean, this is the exact lyrics, right? It's a beautiful song if you're not really paying much attention to the lyrics. It's a nice melody, but it reads, every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. And then look at the refrain here. Repeated 6 times, I'll be watching you. I mean, this is creepy. I mean, this is now, right? This is like lurking or stalking, even though, you know, we think about it as a love song. Well, this is really love out of control, right? Because how many of you would actually want to have or be in a relationship where someone is actually doing this? Right? It's stifling. There are a lot of negative emotions that are revolving around this sort of extreme passion of love. Okay, so let's talk about the science now. This is the typical methodology. This is the technique that psychologists will use, and sometimes they'll have biochemists working with them. So essentially, you find a large college campus like Central Florida, and you put out an advertisement. This could be for a general psych class. We need volunteers. You know how this works. But in this case, they're looking for couples. You have to volunteer as a couple, okay? Not just as an individual getting extra credit in class. So let's say a couple shows up, okay? They both volunteer, and we ascertain how long they've been seeing each other, and you know, all of these other kind of demographics. So typically we're looking for couples who have just started to date, maybe just started to become physically intimate, right? So it's pretty new in the relationship. So once we gather the demographic data, we make another appointment. They come back, let's say, a week later. So on day 2 of the experiment, we now sit the guy in a chair. They're in a lab, and we strap all kinds of physiological monitors, you know, vital life signs, to the guy. So we're measuring his heart rate, breathing rate, galvanic skin response. You know, that gives us a level of arousal based on skin conductance. In the more elaborate methodologies, we'll actually do eye scans. So we'll have cameras which are monitoring eye movements, pupillary dilation, as well as where they are gazing. If there are biochemists involved, they'll take blood samples. Now, don't ask me who volunteers for this kind of, you know, extra credit, but people do. Okay, so on day 2, the guy is strapped in, right? All of his vital signs are being recorded. So we have baseline. We know what's going on now when he's just sitting there calmly by himself. Then we ask his partner to come into the lab. Remember, they've just started the date. And as soon as he sees his girlfriend, everything goes off the chart. Right? The galvanic skin response, heart rate, everything is moving. He's highly aroused, right? And we can pick that up. Not only in terms of the you know, monitoring the vital life signs, but if we draw bloods on him and we, you know, analyze what kind of substances are in his blood, we're going to find an increase in all 5 of these neurotransmitters. I'll talk about them in a moment. Okay, so we're now trying to assess the physiological conditions under which passionate love will be observed. Right? There's a bodily change. There is a biochemical change, a substrate that's associated with passionate love. It's not just psychological, right? The body is actually becoming aroused under these circumstances. Excuse me. So, if we're talking about PEA, this is a love molecule, and basically, if you have higher amounts of PEA, it elevates your arousal levels. You're getting excited, okay? Oxytocin is also called the cuddle compound because if you, for instance, inject oxytocin in rats, even male rats, for instance, will start to cuddle baby rats. In other words, they start to take on a nurturing role, even though in normal conditions, male rats will not get near baby rats. Okay, but they take on a maternal role. Moms, when they give birth and when they are breastfeeding, also have elevated levels of oxytocin. And of course, all of these involve intimate encounters, physical encounters with her infant. You need to have a right balance of dopamine in your system, not too much, not too little. Dopamine is associated with muscular activation. So if you are aroused, for instance, you want your muscles to be prepared for any extra activity, okay, that might be required or even demanded, okay? Endorphin stands for endogenous morphine. So endorphins are neurotransmitters which they're naturally occurring, painkillers. So for instance, if a good example would be a marathoner. Many times distance runners will tell you when they hit around a 20-mile mark of a marathon, they might hit the wall, so to speak. In other words, at that point they feel totally exhausted. They don't think they can take another step. They don't think they can complete the race, and yet they push on. They force themselves, and they're able to finish the marathon. And under these circumstances, many times they'll say, well, I got that second win, I was able to get over the wall. We now know it's because there was a release of endorphin in their system at that time. Bodybuilders will say the same thing. With a heavy workout, when they feel as if they can't go anymore, but they keep on pushing through the pain, they many times report having a flush. Their body feels like there's a golden flush. That would be an endorphin release. Right? So there's less pain, you're able to complete the physical performance. Okay? So we have elevated levels of endorphin. Having endorphin in your system feels good. And I should also mention parenthetically, this is why we have such an opioid crisis in the United States, because opioids are synthetics which mimic the effect of endorphin, but like 10,000 times the dosage. Right? Pheromones would be neurotransmitters which are released by your bodies, but they can be picked up by other individuals, other organisms, and carry a message on to them. So how does this relate to, let's say, attraction and relationships? I'll start off with other species, other animal species. So maybe you have a family dog, and it's your task to walk the dog each day. And you probably wondered, under these circumstances, why is my dog spritzing the bushes like every 10 paces? I mean, does he have a bladder problem? Or, why can't we just get to the walk and make one pee and one poop and, easy? But your dog is doing this for a reason, and it's not because it has a weak bladder. Urine contains pheromones. And the messages that are being delivered via these pheromones all have a great deal of adaptive value for that species. So for instance, the urine of dogs and cats will first of all tell the next dog or cat who comes by how recently the owner of that urine has spritzed the bushes, how frequently since the last rainfall, because they typically spray the same bush, right? What's the sex of the urinator? If it's female, is she in estrus? Is she in heat or not? And also the age. So you can all imagine there's a lot of important information that's being conveyed by the scent of an animal's urine. In effect, when your dog and cats will do this in the wild too, they'll patrol a territory, and they're marking their scent, right? Essentially, think about these. Every time your dog spritzes a bush or a hydrant, your dog is leaving a calling card. It's letting other dogs know, I'm here, this is who I am, this is my territory. Okay? Research has shown, however, that pheromones can also play a role in terms of interpersonal attraction. The initial experiments took place with dogs, where it became apparent that female dogs, for instance, have preferences, even for male dogs who they've never met before, but just basically solely on the scent of the male dog, females will have a preference, and that can only be due to pheromones because they've never interacted with the dog before. They never saw this other, the male dog. We're only presenting the odor of that dog to the female, and yet preferences will occur under these circumstances. With eye scanning and pupil dilation. So remember, the guy, talking about the human participant now, is strapped in a chair in the lab. So we're seeing all of these monitors, going off the board here when he sees his girlfriend. With regard to the activity of the eyes, well, for one thing, we know that he's now focused. He's gazed on his girlfriend. Before, at baseline, he's just looking around the lab and, not paying much attention to anything. He's not focusing. But his girlfriend comes in, the eyes are focused, and perhaps an even more significant signal that he's really attentive and finds this really pleasant and interesting is that his pupils dilate. They actually, and this is involuntary, but his pupils actually get larger. Research has shown that with guys, for instance, if you show them a photo of a Playboy centerfold, you get the same effect. The pupils dilate. It's like the eyes open up, so they're gathering more information visually. Okay, so this is taking place now during the first few weeks, few months that a couple have been in a relationship. You bring this couple, you bring the guy back in 6 months later, strap him in, you know, do all of the recording devices, bring the girlfriend into the lab, and what happens? Nothing. Flatline. No change. Right? So the chemicals that we saw before, you know, popping up during the romantic phase of their relationship, no, it's not there. No difference now in the eye scanning. There's no pupillary dilation either. I mean, it's basically as if any old person walked into the room, right? He's not getting the same kick or charge out of it as he did 6 months earlier. Okay, everybody with me as far as the methodology and the outcomes? Okay, so what happens next? Here was just another slide with regard to family. Actually, I forgot about this. House of Family. So you probably know this. There are companies now that have created, I don't know, perfumes, I don't know, colognes, which have pheromones in them. And they claim that this will increase your attractiveness to the other sex. And it's based solely on this proposition that pheromones, the right kinds of pheromones, might have this effect on people. Okay? There is no evidence that that is the case, at least for these synthetic pheromones. Oops. Okay. So, what happens to this couple now after 6 months? A lot of research has shown that romantic and passionate love, which has this biochemical basis, there is bodily arousal which is associated with the passion, right? That disappears after 6 months. The bloom is off the rose. So now the question is, what does the couple do? What can they do? So this is the famous Marilyn Monroe movie, The 7-Year Itch. I think it's more like a 6-month itch. At least that's what the research suggests. Okay, so we need to distinguish between two types of love. The love we've been talking about up till now is passionate love, otherwise known as romantic love. And this is short-term, 6 months. And it's characterized by being highly emotional. There's going to be lots of ups and downs. You will be on an emotional roller coaster if you are in a passionate love relationship, particularly if you score, you know, at the higher end, the upper end on the passionate love scale. So you're going to be much more sensitive to these swings in your relationship. If you feel that your partner maybe hasn't been as attentive as he or she should have been to you, you're going to have a more extreme emotion than individuals who are scoring lower on the passionate love scale. This is also been referred to as having a crush on someone, puppy love, and as we've already seen, there's a lot of physiological activation that takes place during the throes of passionate love. But that changes after 6 months, right? So now the question is, what can or what should the couple do? And the answer is this. There are only two things that the couple can do at that point. They break up, which would be one option. The other is that they enter into a companionate love relationship. So notice that the qualities of companionate love are different than passionate love. So here we have a long-term commitment, one which is built on reciprocity, mutual respect, and I should also include here trust and a great deal of self-disclosure. You have to be able to share yourself with an individual if you're going to make this succeed in the long term. 6 months, there's not much of an investment yet, okay? But if you're talking about a long-term commitment, then it becomes more important that individuals start to share their thoughts, their feelings. It isn't just about the physiology anymore. right, and bodily functions. Yes?
Can the passionate love within the first 6 months be defined as, or kind of called, the honeymoon phase? Or?
Yeah, that's it. That's good. Yeah, and then things start to change. At least the feelings might change, unless the couple is aware of what changes are taking place and they're able to talk through that. Yes, go ahead.
That like second part where you're talking about they have that choice to now be more or provide more self-disclosure. Is that like research-based or more like, I guess?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. And marital counselors and therapists will tell you that that is generally the first solution if a couple comes in because of some marital discord or distress. First thing you got to work on is communication and trust. So, if your parents are happily married, they have done so because they have entered into a companion love phase of their relationship. Earlier on, maybe they met, your mom and dad met when they were in college maybe, and initially it would have been romantic love. But to the extent that they stayed together, created a family, had you, or still happily married, that would have to be due to the companion love that they had established. Now, when a couple enters into a companion of love relationship, that doesn't mean passion is no longer there. What it means is you have to plan for the passion. You have to work for it. So this is when maybe you've heard your parents say, okay, we're gonna take a mom and dad vacation. We're going on a long vacation. You're gonna stay with grandma and grandpa, right? And so what your parents are probably doing is setting aside, planning some time where they will be alone together so they can rekindle the passion. But it's not going to occur automatically. Like, imagine your dad now is sitting in the living room sofa and your mom walks in. He's not going to get a heavy dose of endorphin or PEA or anything like that, right? He's not going to get the same charge as when he first met your mom. But they can plan for that. They can plan for a romantic evening or a romantic dinner, going away to the beach for the weekend, and that's how you can rekindle the passion. But you can't assume that it will take place automatically if you've entered companion love. Okay, other questions so far? The question?
What if in the case where, for example, a couple got together in college and, first loves, first everything's, all that, and they want to go from companionate love back to passionate love with someone else? Would that be...
At the same time?
I don't, like, the dating scene is very different now, and especially for older people as well.
I am an older person, so are you talking about a non-exclusive relationship? Is that what you're getting
I
at?
suppose I'm talking about marriage and then being like, oh, okay, I actually want to see what else is out there. And then navigating that type of ordeal.
I don't know if there's been much research on that. That's such, for one thing, I don't think, is it that common? Really? But the other thing is this.
Some of it is cultural as well.
A lot of couples probably would not want to be part of a research investigation if they were doing that. There's just too much information that they're giving that stranger, someone in a white lab coat. So I'm not aware of any research that has done that. But I guess, on one hand, it would depend on the level of mutual trust and communication that was established with the couple. If one of them still wasn't trustful or felt that the communication lines weren't open, it's probably not going to work, no matter what it is. Okay? All right, so here's actually a chart showing that across time, we expect to see companionate love increase, and then of course it levels off. But very quickly, within about 6 months or so, we have a really sharp decline in romantic or passionate love, and it's going to stay pretty low, at least compared to individuals experiencing companionate love. Questions?
Is that a scale of like weeks or months?
They don't really state the scale here, which they should have, but essentially I'm going to guess years, because companionate love can extend a lifetime. We know couples who have been married 50, 60, they're celebrating their 70th anniversary. Okay? But we can't say the same thing for passionate love. Yes?
Do couples that are like more long distance or like military couples or that sort of thing, do they have different trends with passionate love versus
It might not be passionate love that would sustain them, especially if they have a family and they're married. It's probably their level of companionate love and trust. But I mean, the question of whether prolonged separation or absence affects relationships is one that's still being investigated. I mean, we have two common sense answers, and they're both contradictory. One is absence makes the heart grow fonder, and the other one is out of sight, out of mind. Which one is correct, right? And it probably depends on the quality of the relationship before the separation and whether there's that mutual trust that exists. Okay. Yeah.
So you said generally, like after you get past a certain period, like 6 months,
Yeah.
individuals will go more into companionate love, right?
If they decide not to break up.
Yeah.
Correct.
So what about like, you know, when people start getting married, that's another like big event. Would that passion love go back up again? Or
Well, that's one reason why we have honeymoons, right? But here's the interesting thing. Etiquette-wise, I remember reading this is a couple of decades ago, and I know things have changed within a generation. If you were to pick up an etiquette book, like Emily Post's etiquette book, they would actually write that the ideal duration of engagement period is 6 months, right? So you're starting to meet someone, you get engaged, 6 months, you're supposed to get married. But the psychological research suggests that you're getting married at exactly the time when you have to be thinking about things, and right, and not just following this etiquette guideline as far as this 6 month trial period or something like that. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Oh, that's it. So I'm going to leave you with a quote by Shakespeare: "Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid, painted blind." So, thank you for listening. And before you all leave, I have a handout. So, each one of you should take a Valentine's goodie bag. And let me preface this by saying I'm not giving this just to you. I'm hopeful that by tomorrow you will find someone you can give it to. Okay, so there's a goodie bag, and please have at it. Yep. Yeah, it's always nicer if you could share it, right? Give it to someone else. Sweets for the sweet.
Everyone help me thank Dr. Vaughn, please.